Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Happy Friday. It is March 22nd, and we are going to be looking at a lot of basketball today. The round of 64 kicked off yesterday, so we will be talking about the biggest stories there, starting with mainly Kentucky's loss to Oakland in the first round. This is now a handful of years now where Kentucky has underperformed, which is leading to a lot of questions surrounding head coach John Calipari's job security. So we'll be getting into that along with all the other biggest stories from yesterday. Then in the second half of the show, we are going to be getting into the shutting down of the NBA G League Ignite. The association announced that they will not be renewing the Ignite for next season. So we will talk about sort of how this all played out for the Ignite program and what it means for the future of basketball. Then finally, we are going to end off the show by looking ahead to the upcoming weekend, the biggest storylines and matchups that you should be keeping an eye out for. But before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. To our live viewers, to use the comment section, give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports. We can make this show as interactive as possible. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that will be streaming across the bottom ticker throughout the show. That is gsmcpodcast.net. It would be greatly appreciated. But getting into our first segment of the day, Kentucky last night pulled off a pretty rare feat in terms of the lack of history and the bad streak that they have been on in the past handful of NCAA tournaments. They lost to Oakland, the Oakland of Michigan, the Golden Grizzlies, and they came into the game as 13.5-point favorites. They end up losing. The game started a little slow offensively, and then in came Jack Golke of the Golden Grizzlies. Comes off the bench for Oakland. He hit 7 3-pointers in the first half, finished the game 10 of 20 from 3, and had a career-high 32 points. One of 5 players in the history of the NCAA tournament to hit 10 3-pointers in a game. Most recently was Carson Edwards of Purdue a handful of years ago, and he went down as a hero really in terms of that run, and we'll see how long this lasts for Golke and Oakland. Quick note on Golke: he took 335 shots this season. Those numbers are not right. 355 shots this season. 337 of them were 3-pointers. Had just 345, 337, only 8 2-point attempts on the year. Excuse my math here for a second, but in the most respectful way possible, this random player in March Madness, he had spent years playing Division II basketball, transfers to Oakland, Michigan, and lights up a team of future NBA prospects, and this is why we love March Madness. This is why we watch the games. Now, granted, wasn't all Golke. He just gave them the spark that they needed in order to pick up a halftime lead, and once they were in that game, they started believing. Like the Golden Grizzlies head coach Greg Kampe told his team, that they win close games. And that they did yesterday in an unbelievable matchup. Crazy story with Kampe, 40 years coached at Oakland, and now picks up the biggest win in the program's history, and one that will be remembered forever. Golke got on the microphone after the game and said that they are not a Cinderella story, and I guess we'll see if that is fully the case. They will be playing NC State on Saturday to see if they can keep the dream alive. NC State also pulled off an upset yesterday, and truthfully, I do think that the path is there, but it's going to take at least another Cinderella story in NC State being knocked off to see if that is the case. But getting into the Kentucky side of this, where this marks one of, if not the biggest loss in Calipari's time with Kentucky. Many people had high hopes for Kentucky this season because of the NBA talent that they have and their high-powered offense. They have at least 2 lottery picks in Reed Sheppard and Rob Dillingham. They have a handful of other freshman talent, such as DJ Wagner, Justin Edwards, Aaron Bradshaw, who maybe aren't going to be first-round picks this year. Wagner could maybe find his way into the first round, but a ton of NBA talent in the making, some really high recruits coming into this season, and they end up being bounced before the second weekend yet again. So as much as I can say that I didn't expect them to lose round 1 to Oakland, it isn't the most shocking thing in the world to me that they did find themselves out early in the tournament, where their defense has been horrible this season, ranked 115 by KenPom. They, in this game, did not guard the three-point line whatsoever, allowed 15 made three-pointers, of course 10 of them coming from Golke, but if they were to run into a hot hand, it is very possible for them to get into shootouts, and that was the case in this game. And as we saw, they just weren't able to get stops down the stretch where they were still in the game, but the Grizzlies were just able to get it done down the stretch. Townsend, I believe his name was really good down the stretch of that season as well. And what I didn't expect out of this game was to see their top players fold to the level that they did. Rob Dillingham, Reed Sheppard, DJ Wagner, combined of 3 of 19 from the field. Specifically, Dillingham and Sheppard were very disappointing just with the lack of efficiency. Dillingham at times can be erratic in a good way in terms of, he can be a little bit of a heat check player and make tough shots. Reed Sheppard, though, was one of the most efficient players in the country this season, let alone for a freshman. He shot over 50% from 3 this season, and he did not put in a good performance in this one. And this is the latest of a really ugly stretch for Kentucky in the postseason, where since John Calipari was signed to a lifetime contract with Kentucky following their Elite 8 run in 2019, we had the COVID season cancel out, but other than that, the 4 seasons that have fully been played, they didn't qualify for the tournament. They lost to a 15-seeded St. Peter's in the first round, lost in the second round last year to Kansas State, and now they are upset by the 14-seeded Oakland. They are the 4th team since the 64-team bracket was added in 1985 to lose to a 14 seed or lower in the first round 2 times in a span of 3 years. So it has been a really rough stretch. Have not reached the second weekend since 2019. And for a blue blood program with a well-renowned head coach and some of the best NBA talent that we've seen over the past decade or so, they have not been to the Final Four since 2015. And I understand it is extremely hard to maintain consistent success in college basketball. I think that it is probably the hardest sport to continue to manage a level of dominance over the course of the years. The NFL would be the only thing that really rivals it in my eyes, but just one championship for Calipari with Kentucky. And again, you just look at the level of NBA talent that they've had, it does feel to be a little bit underwhelming. So, and as a stat here, Matt Norlander of CBS had a stat that Kentucky is 11-18 against ranked opponents in the past 4 seasons, just to sort of add to all of that. So the question is, where does Kentucky go from here? Because there have been rumblings about Kentucky fans and the program being unsatisfied with Calipari the past few years since the loss to St. Peter's, and now it's getting louder and louder by the moment. It would cost Kentucky $33 million to buy out Calipari from his contract. There is the question of how long he himself wants to put up with this pressure cooker of a spot to be in and the scrutiny that he's been receiving over the years. It is not an easy task to be a college coach in today's world with NIL and all of the extra aspects of the job that are put on a coach's shoulder because of it. But now, especially with the Kentucky program and the way that they've been so reliant on freshman talent through a lot of their years, seems like they are maybe going to have to at least sort of reconsider parts of how they build their teams together. And again, I do think that the situation in Lexington is difficult. They've been very reliant on young talent, but if you look at the defensive issues they had this year, I don't think that age really plays a factor in it, where they were as bad as they were outside of the top 100. That's just not a recipe for success, and they have the individual players and NBA talent that could be a part of it, but they were never, in my eyes, I didn't consider them a real threat going forward in this tournament. I had them as a second round exit anyways, and even I overestimated their powers in that. But you talk about the youth talent with Kentucky and the fact that if you look at this year too, yes, they had a lot of inexperience on the roster and they were reliant offensively on some of that young talent. 3 of the 5 players yesterday that got over 20 minutes in playing time weren't freshmen. Antonio Reeves and Trey Mitchell, both seniors, were easily their top 2 most reliable players in this game, and it still wasn't enough. If it wasn't for Reeves putting up the offensive numbers he did, they might not have even been in this game necessarily. So trying to re-up for next year with the same type of philosophy that they have been running with the past few years doesn't seem like it's necessarily going to sell the fan base on the situation the way that I'm sure they would like to be the case, because they had so much freshman talent this year. At least 6 of them have sort of cycled their way through mock drafts and potentially being, NBA players, whether it's this year or in the future, where I think DJ Wagner could be an NBA talent. It might take him another year to work his way into the lottery. We'll see what he decides to do. but also holding on to a lot of these guys for next season would definitely be beneficial. Is it going to work out that way? Is Kentucky going to want to try and run this over again with Calipari as the head coach? Is Calipari himself going to want to put up with everything in this situation? The reality is he can have a job in sports where, I wouldn't quite say wherever he wants, but in a handful of different aspects. I'm sure there are a good number of, Power 5 programs that would love to have him on board. A name that has been thrown out there is Michigan, who just fired Juwan Howard. I think that there is probably a solid chance that if he wanted to go there, he could. He could also have plenty of job opportunities in the media if that is also the route he wanted to go. I still believe he is a good coach. And I don't know what exactly it was with them in terms of why was their defense so bad. He and Kentucky fans that will defend him can try and blame it on the youth, but I do think that there was a level of how this season played out that it does extend beyond that to some degree, and I'm just not really sure where really both parties want to go after this. And if Calipari wants to go somewhere else, maybe he can work with Kentucky. He can play a little bit of hardball to at least get some of that money. But if it's just Kentucky wanting out here, $33 million is a lot to move on from. And we see it all the time. I feel like, especially in college football, of these coaches being handed out these massive deals and then years later being fired, and these programs that are, big time and everything can afford the losses because of how much revenue they make. And I do believe that Kentucky can continue to make money without Calipari, but what's it going to look like from a recruiting standpoint? There's no doubt that he's been one of the best recruiters for the past decade and a half, and now we are potentially looking at a new era here in Kentucky. As long as I've watched college basketball, it's been Calipari and Kentucky. So we'll see with all of that. It's obviously too soon for really either side to have a definitive answer, and it is something that we will keep you up to date on. But for now, we are going to be taking our first break of the show. When we come back on the other side, we will be rounding up the rest of college basketball from yesterday. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up talking about John Calipari and the Kentucky Wildcats going forward following their loss yesterday to Oakland. Now we are going to be getting into the remainder of the games from yesterday. We, of course, just talked at length about, I think you can call Calipari a legend. He's at least one of the biggest head coaching faces of the past decade plus. We saw another one of those coaches in action yesterday as Tom Izzo led Michigan State to a very convincing win against Mississippi State. That was the first matchup of the day. They played Mississippi State, who was ranked 21st in defense according to KenPom, but the Spartans were able to score 69 points and shoot over 50% from the field. They never trailed in this game. This was Izzo's 17th career win in March Madness as a lower seeded team, which is the most in NCAA history. So, as we know, the saying goes, January, February, Izzo, along those lines, where he is the king of March, or at least that is his reputation, and they will be advancing to play UNC in what should be a very interesting matchup. Michigan State, as it currently stands, is a 3.5-point underdog for that game. UNC, the 1 seed, blew out Wagner yesterday. So I'm very curious to see how that all plays out for them. But this was one example of the SEC having a really brutal day where they were just 1-3. Tennessee beating 15-seeded St. Peter's was the one victory for the conference yesterday. Kentucky, like we just talked about at length, them, South Carolina, and Mississippi State all lost as the higher seeded teams. Speaking of South Carolina, they played Oregon yesterday, where we saw Jermaine Couisnard, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, the fifth-year senior who had spent 3 seasons with South Carolina before transferring, score 40 points against his former team. Couisnard transferred after South Carolina changed coaches a couple seasons ago, and yesterday he came back to haunt them. South Carolina had a good defense this year, but Oregon just had their way en route to an 87-73 victory. One of my favorite players in college basketball, N'Faly Dante, continues his really impressive run where he scored 23 points on 7 of 9 shooting in the past 6 games, which stretches back just before the Pac-12 tournament. He is averaging 20.5 points per game and shooting 86%, which is a ridiculously efficient number for him there. He didn't miss a single shot in the Pac-12 tournament, so he is making a name for himself. He was dominant in this game as well, along with Couisnard, who, again, 40 points in his terrific performance. And Oregon is headed for another reunion of sorts. It was Couisnard in South Carolina yesterday. Now they will be taking on Creighton on Saturday, where their head coach, Dana Altman, spent 16 years as their head coach. So Oregon will continue to give us some storylines headed into the weekend. We also had a terrific game between Samford and Kansas, where Kansas escaped a late comeback win over Samford to win 93-89. The game did come with some controversy, though, down the stretch, where in the final 30 seconds, Kansas's Nicholas Timberlake broke through the Bulldogs' press coverage to attempt a dunk, and AJ Staten McCray seemed to come back and make a tremendous chase down block. Timberlake hit the ground hard. A foul was called, but at this point, Kansas was up just 1, so this was a big-time call, and it was clear from the first replay that this was a clean block. Now, I will say, I also thought initially when watching it in full time, it did look like a foul, but again, clearly when you went back and looked at the replay, it was all ball, and really it was a terrible call. I hate when stuff like this happens because I hate talking about the referees really when we are talking about sports, and that is a little bit what this has broken into. But it was a pivotal moment where, again, Jayhawks up 1. This block, had it gone through without a call, would have been a 5-on-4 break for Samford going back down the other end with a chance to win the game. But instead, Timberlake went to the free throw line and he knocked down both the shots. The Bulldogs missed their final attempt from 3, and that was the game. Again, I'm never really a fully blame the refs guy. I just feel like it's lazy. There's so much game that does happen, and I know it's unfortunate when it happens in the biggest moments, but at this point, you do also have to give the Jayhawks credit, and that's coming from me, who I've been pretty low on Kansas headed into this tournament. I didn't think they were going to have the legs and really the bodies to put up with the press that Samford was going to put on them, and I expected this to be an upset, but their offense really showed out, scoring 93 points without their leading scorer in Kevin McCullough Jr. KJ Adams was terrific again, and he led the team with 20 points in this game. He showed he was capable of carrying a good share of the offensive load during the Big 12 tournament when they faced off against Cincinnati. And yes, I know that they lost that game by 20, but when it was close early in the second half, it was because Adams was going to work, and he had 22 points in that game. So I thought that he did everything he could in that game, showed he was ready to take on a bigger role when the team needed it, and he did in this one. Hunter Dickinson was also terrific, 19 points, 20 rebounds, and 4 blocks. And credit Nicholas Timberlake, who was really struggling heading into the tournament, shooting 33% from the field in his last 5 games. Kansas was staggering at this point, granted, yes, with some injuries, but they were 1-4 during that stretch. He shot 2 for 9 during the Cincinnati game in the Big 12 tournament, but he came in, played big moments for Kansas in this game, went 5 of 8 from the field, and scored 19, icing the game with those final free throws. I'm still not ready to abandon the idea that I don't consider Kansas to be a serious contender and winning it all. Now, let me know if you disagree in the comments. I don't think they have the extra legs for it. But that being said, I will be picking Gonzaga to beat the Jayhawks on Saturday. It was an impressive win nonetheless. Maybe they'll continue to prove me wrong. We also saw a wild ending between Nevada and Dayton, where Dayton was the higher seed in this matchup, but were the betting underdogs. And they trailed 39-56 with about 7 minutes left in the game. 17-point lead for the Wolfpack, and Dayton closed on a 24-4 run to come back and win 63-60. They scored 17 consecutively at one point, and this was the first time we saw a team come back in March Madness from at least a 17-point deficit to win since Nevada actually in 2018. So we got to see a really monumental comeback here. We got to see Dayton's Deron Holmes go to work. He got going down the stretch there, including an and one that could have been one of the meanest, most vicious, and biggest in moment posters of the season. He did not get the dunk to go down, but it hit the rim, it bounced up and fell back in. That was with about 2 minutes left. He ends up hitting the free throw to give the Flyers their first lead of the second half, and the reigning Atlantic 10 Player of the Year finished with 18 points. So a great performance from him personally. I wanted to briefly touch on Arizona versus Long Beach State, which the first half was a little bit competitive. Arizona ends up blowing them out. so I'm not going to spend too much time on the game itself, but I did want to highlight the fact that this was Dan Monson's last game with Long Beach State. For those of you who don't know, he was fired right at the end of the regular season, and Long Beach State's athletic director, Bobby Smitherin, was talking to reporters before the game, and usually I try and not bring too much negativity to the show, but this guy sounded like a total loser, taking credit for the fact that Long Beach State made the tournament because he fired Monson. So again, the Beach were on a losing streak to end the regular season. He was fired by Smitherin after that 5-game losing streak. He was allowed to coach through the conference tournament out of respect. The Beach ran the table in the 3 games, won their conference, got the automatic bid into March Madness, and Smitherin gave a quote before their game saying, "My belief and hope is that by doing what I did and the timing of it, they would play inspired, and that's what they did." He went on to say, "I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but it worked," which is just one of the most irritating things to me. Really grinded my gears, the fact that he was trying to make himself to be some sort of hero for the program when you let go of a coach that's been there for 17 years. We're talking about a Long Beach State program that does not have a big time history, and you let him go before the season even ends. Yes, the transfer portal window does open up a little bit sooner. Maybe you want to make the move quick to get the change going as soon as possible, but I thought it was dirty at the time, the way that it all played out, and I think it's even dirtier that he tried to take credit for the job that Monson and the Beach did in order to get their automatic bid. So I did just want to highlight that. Another big storyline from yesterday was the fact that 11 seeds ruled the day. We talked about Oregon beating South Carolina. This was the least surprising of the batch. Oregon was actually the betting favorites in this game, just slightly, but wasn't technically an upset in the eyes of Vegas. But we also saw Duquesne take down BYU and NC State finish off Texas Tech. And it's funny because these were the bid stealers. These were the 3 teams that likely were not going to make the tournament had they not run the table in their conference championships. And here they are. A lot of people were upset because they kept some teams out in the bubble. But you know what? At least they made it worth it for everyone by picking up their wins. So quickly on the 2 that we have not yet covered, BYU seemed like they could have been an upset candidate based on how their offense plays. They don't get to the rim very well. Over 50% of their field goal attempts this season were from beyond the 3-point line, which in terms of a game-to-game basis can be a dangerous game to play. Duquesne, led by head coach Keith Dambrett, on his retirement tour, they end up stealing the game from the Cougars by running them off of the 3-point line, and by the time that BYU really got it going more and adjusted to the style of play that they needed in order to be competitive in this game, the Dukes had built up a lead that was insurmountable. I am a little sad we don't get to see more of Jackson Robinson in the tournament. He intrigues me as an NBA prospect, a little bit on the older side, but he's a great scorer. He had 25 in this game, and they end up losing. So be it. We also saw NC State continue their little bit of a Cinderella run after winning the 5 games in 5 days in the ACC tournament, being the second team to ever do so. So we are going to see them continue, and they will be facing off against Oakland to see who the true Cinderella team is. Last note here on yesterday's games, we did see Illinois dominate Morehead State. We saw a very big-time performance from Marcus Damask, where with Illinois, they haven't really had a traditional point guard. And in this game, it was Damask stepping up with the playmaking. He finishes with a triple-double. He scored 12 points, grabbed 11 rebounds, and dished out 10 assists. So this was a really encouraging performance from Illinois as a whole. We saw Terrence Shannon Jr. continue the heater that he is on offensively, scoring 26 points in this game. And the Illini are a very interesting team going forward because they have some of the firepower necessary to take down anyone. So we are going to be headed into our third segment. But while we're on this round of 64, I will point out the fact that we have an overtime game between Northwestern and Florida Atlantic right now, and Northwestern is taking over down the stretch in overtime. Boo Buie, another one of my favorite players in college basketball, is really made for moments like this, and we could see the Owls, who made the Final Four last year, have their season ended. But we are going to be taking our second break, and when we come back on the other side, we will be getting into the G League Ignite situation, how the NBA just announced they will not be renewing the program, and it will be done after this season. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube, absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up rounding out the initial thoughts here on the round of 64 through the first day of the tournament. Now we are going to be turning our eyes more towards the NBA and specifically the G League, as the league has announced that they will be shutting down the G League Ignite program after this season. For those of you who aren't aware of the existence of this league, it is a developmental program that was introduced in 2020 to be a way for high school basketball prospects to make money playing basketball in their year leading up to their NBA draft eligibility. The timeline of this is important to consider based off the fact that at the time they were, as Adam Silver put it, filling a hole for giving these players an option to make money. This was prior to the court case NCAA versus Alston that allowed college athletes to make money off their name, image, and likeness. So the spirit of the program was a really beneficial thing at the time of its inception, but immediately after, it was almost, and I say undermined, but ultimately it is a good thing. I feel like it has usually a negative connotation, but for the sake of this specific initiative, it was sort of undermined by the court case that took place. And now with all of these other players being able to make money at college as well, it doesn't make a ton of sense for it to exist. Now, to be fair, there are still prospects out there that don't want to put up with school and everything that comes with that, which everybody should be entitled to being able to operate in whatever facet they want to. If you're talking about a top NBA prospect that feels they have a real chance to go and make money in the NBA, It's understandable that you don't want to spend that much time putting up with classes and everything instead of making yourself the best possible NBA prospect. But there were definitely flaws with the G League. I believe that if you look at the history of it, which, granted, short history, had a handful of success when we're talking about 4 lottery picks that all went in the top 10 that graduated from this Ignite program. It was Jalen Green and Jonathan Kuminga in 2021 draft, Dyson Daniels in 2022, and most recently Scoot Henderson going 3rd overall this past season. We are also likely to see at least one more lottery pick this upcoming year with Modest Buzelis, and it could possibly be 2 if Ron Holland makes it into the lottery as well. He did get officially ruled out for the rest of the season with a thumb injury, so we're not going to see him again. We'll see how this impacts his draft stock, but it's really interesting to sort of evaluate how this is all played out for the Ignite program, because granted, they now have a handful of names that they can say, well, they made it into the lotteries, so job accomplished. But I do believe that there are problems even still with the way that this has played out, considering the fact that the team itself has been dreadfully bad. You talk about trying to win basketball games, and it has not taught these prospects to actually compete as a team, which translates to the next level. The Ignite are just 6-40 this year, which obviously is terrible, and really through the history of it, it hasn't been good. And, you know, to some degree, that makes sense because you're talking about the youngest players possible. A lot of these other G League players have been in the NBA before, have already been drafted into the NBA, and we've seen just a lack of success with the team success, which I do think also sort of rubs off on how these prospects perform when they reach the next level. And, you know, maybe it's just happens to be the selective group. Again, we only have a few years of this program, so it's hard to make these definitive statements because we don't have necessarily the biggest body of work. But you see, all of these players that have been drafted in the lottery have been pretty raw coming into the league, where a lot of people don't like Jalen Green because of some of the inefficiency, the hero ball that he plays. I think that you could make an argument that that is partially due to the environment that they were growing up in. Jonathan Kuminga, who also granted came into a scenario with the Warriors where they were trying to win immediately, and he didn't necessarily have the time to develop a team game coming into it. Now he's flourishing, but it has taken some time for that to fully come into effect. And it's because I think in this program, it is a lot of players almost stepping on each other's toes in terms of trying to make themselves the best possible NBA prospects. This is also compiled with the fact that there are some veterans on the team that in reality, they're trying to find their own way into the league as well. And they want to, sure, help these young players, but they also have to have somewhat of selfish intents themselves, which is totally fair. And it is just really hard to evaluate the success level of this program as a whole. Again, they've had a handful of players to sort of hang their hats on, but I think the fact that the NBA is pulling the plug because they know there are better options for these young players to go pursue. Part of what prospects gain so much from playing college basketball is the fact that, yes, personally, they are looking to become still intriguing NBA prospects, but there's a real brotherhood that is developed from playing in a team system, and there's a main goal of winning the national championship, and everybody is working together towards this one thing, and it's less so about yourself personally. And I just don't know if there was that same environment in the G League Ignite. Granted, it's not like I was in the locker room, so maybe I am, out of touch making comments like this, but I don't think it's that abstract to think that that's at least somewhat how this all went down, because you look at some of the play styles and just sort of how it's been awkward fits with these players coming into the NBA. I feel like there's been a, time being taken in order to see them actually be able to flourish in these new spots. And I think it partially has to do with the fact that they weren't really incentivized to play a team game as they were developing and coming up in this program. Now, I also want to admit the fact that I was sort of hoping that the G League Ignite would dissolve, because of the fact that, I think the most important thing was for these players to be able to make money playing basketball before they were professionally eligible. So again, I thought that it was a necessary thing when it was first introduced. It just very quickly wasn't necessary when name, image, and likeness laws were passed to allow players to make this money. But for me personally, I'm a college basketball fan, and I feel like there's been a little bit of a lack of star power in college basketball because we have some of these big time names. I feel like the likes of a Jalen Green or a Scoot Henderson would have been big time stars in college basketball, and that just hasn't been the case. And we've seen, granted, the college basketball is in a weird spot. It has been for some time, but especially so with the NIL deals, where there's just so much movement from team to team that there's not really a development plan or stability with a lot of these prospects. So maybe they would have been flashes in the pan, but at the same time, if you remember back to Zion Williamson and RJ Barrett at Duke, we had John Morant at Murray State. It made for some awesome moments during college basketball. Lonzo Ball, if you look back to when he was drafted, I just feel like these were all borderline box office guys that we just haven't really seen over the past couple seasons, and I'm not sure exactly what that is. Maybe, again, there isn't quite as much to really be able to fix there, because best case you're getting these players probably for one season anyways if they really are that talented. But I do feel like there's just been a real shortage of big time names in college basketball. We're looking at Zach Edey, who plays for Purdue, has won 2 consecutive Player of the Year awards, and nobody really cares. And that's because Purdue has underachieved for the past couple years. It's because Edey doesn't play the most marketable, the most fun brand of basketball that draws in necessarily a large audience. But all of it sort of compiled together has just left a little bit of stardom. And I think that with the Ignite ceasing to exist, essentially, we are headed in a direction where we can at least get some of that excitement back. Now, when we talked about this initially, because Adam Silver had put out a little bit of a feeler that the NBA was contemplating the dissolving of the G League Ignite program. We sort of talked about this before. There still should be an option for prospects that don't want to go into a school environment to play basketball, and if they don't want to, they shouldn't be forced into it. So there does still need to be some sort of other solution. The NBL from, I believe there's a league in Australia that has found a balance of helping spread the prospects that are a part of the program throughout different teams and allowing there to be a little bit more balance, still allowing there to be a focus on team. Again, it's a little bit difficult to sort of manufacture all this, and I don't personally have all of the answers. But again, for everybody who works in the Ignite program, I'm sorry for your loss, but I feel like this is a beneficial thing to college basketball, which ultimately I am a fan of, so I'm not going to complain all that much. But that is all we have time for on this subject. We're going to be taking our final break, and when we come back, we will be getting into the weekend look ahead for the top storylines to come in college basketball and the NBA. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back, as we are headed into our final segment of the day, going to be looking ahead to the weekend. I do want to quickly update our viewers on what has taken place in college basketball today. We saw the overtime matchup between Northwestern and FAU, with Northwestern coming out on top. This is an Owls team that has been very polarizing for a lot of college basketball fans, where they've had some really bad losses throughout the course of the year, weren't playing very good basketball through the final stretch of the season, but it almost felt like because of the fact that they made the Final Four that last season that they should be in the tournament. They won 25 games this season, so it's not like they had a bad year necessarily, but for a handful of the other teams that were left out of the tournament, this is a little bit of I wouldn't even say it's all that surprising, but it is a disappointment. Hello to our viewers. If you have any thoughts on what has taken place so far in college basketball, or for things to look forward in the weekend, feel free to leave a comment and we can talk it out, as Kirito MVP says hello. But Northwestern is going to be advancing in this game. They are a team that when close matchups have come, they've stepped up to the challenge. They split the season series with Purdue earlier this year, both of those games going to overtime, and in one of those cases upsetting Purdue, who I believe was ranked number 1 at the time. And we saw them again today pull it out in a close matchup. They will be advancing to face a number 1 seed, likely in UConn. UConn has still not officially played their game, but they are going to be facing off any minute now against Stetson. The tip-off was pushed back to 3:15. Not exactly sure what happened there, but should be interesting. We also saw Baylor dominate Colgate in their first round matchup. Baylor is one of my favorite teams from this season. I fell in love with them when I was trying to watch the prospects that they have in Jacoby Walter and Yves Missi, and ultimately I sort of stumbled into the remainder of their players with Jalen Bridges and Jaden Nunn, Ray J. Dennis as well. So been very entertaining to watch them. I think they have a real chance to go the distance as well. So those are the two games that wrapped up. Kirito MVP just commented, the Warriors know most likely getting Klay Thompson back at a very cheap price. What else should they do? They do have some really nice young talent. I'm a big fan of Trace Jackson Davis. I was honestly shocked when he fell as far as he did in the draft last season. Almost one of the last picks of the draft. He's been incredible. One of the best finishers in the NBA as of late. Just an incredibly smart player, a great roller. I really like some of the bench minutes that he's been able to string together with Chris Paul running the offense. I've enjoyed watching that. Brandon Pajemski as well, one of the steals of the draft. Such a good fit for the Warriors, I feel like, where he can shoot, he can do a lot of the stuff off the ball, but also leading the NBA in charges drawn. And then Kuminga, who we talked about a little bit with the G League Ignite conversation in the last segment, where he had plenty of raw potential. It took him some time to fully tap into it, but now he has fully come into his own. In terms of what the Warriors should do long term, it does start with, to some degree, is Klay Thompson going to be willing to come back on a cheaper deal? His mindset has seemed to shift during the course of the season, where at the beginning of the year, he was made comments that it was a no-brainer. He is looking to get paid, but obviously this season has not played out in the way that they were necessarily hoping to. And I think that now that he is spending more time coming off the bench and he's been struggling offensive efficiency-wise, he likely understands that he's not going to get the contract he was initially hoping for. So if that is the case, why not capitalize on just trying to be with the organization? He's a statue guy of this Warriors group, and he's going to go into the Hall of Fame to make it as a Warrior. But along the edges, I'm really not sure what there is to do, because they're paying so much money to Andrew Wiggins, who, while sometimes we still see, glimpses of how he can be great, he's just nowhere near the same level of player that he was when he helped the Warriors win the finals in 2022. Now, he has a big enough contract that if you attach some sort of assets to him, we could see them maybe get some sort of a return. But again, I think it's going to have to be real assets. I personally feel like Steph Curry is willing to stick it out with the Warriors. They should do whatever they can to capitalize on this window, because Steph Curry is still one of the top 10 best basketball players in the NBA, and I don't think he's really fallen off much whatsoever, and there is still that room there. And like you mentioned, Kirito, they have these other young players that should only continue to get better. We're going to need to see them carry the reins a little bit more. I also do look back. Draymond Green is such an enigma of an individual talent sort of to evaluate, because the reality is he is very valuable to helping the Warriors operate. We see the games that Curry and the Warriors have had without Draymond, and it's worse on both ends of the court. I don't like the price that they got Draymond at, but I also understand he brings a level of value that is more than any other team could possibly get out of him. Now, it is also another question in terms of, can they actually keep him under wraps and behaving? Now, because earlier, it was yesterday, 2 nights ago, where the Warriors got into the scuffle with the Grizzlies, and he was getting involved in it. If the Warriors were good, probably would have been a segment that I would have covered fully in depth, because if the Warriors want to have any shot of making a playoff run, they do need Draymond on the court, and they need him to be at least some level. He's never going to be, fully calm. It's part of what makes him great, is that he has that edge to him. But I I don't really feel the need necessarily to fully go in on Draymond Green, where the Warriors are struggling right now. They are the 10 seed in the Western Conference, and chances are they're not going to make the playoffs. I have a hard time sort of fully turning the page on them. They're going to be in the play-in tournament. I know that the Rockets have been heating up and making a little bit of a run for the Warriors' money in terms of stealing that 10 spot. But I think that the Warriors hold out. In a play-in situation, though, do or die against LeBron James and the Lakers, I struggle to see how they have the size and physicality to necessarily go out and make that happen. Now, a name that I've thrown out a handful of times throughout the course of the season, a player that I really like and I feel like he's being wasted a little bit, is Nick Claxton, who I like. Kevon Looney. We've seen flashes of him being a dominant rebounder, but I would like to see the Warriors try and maybe address that center position and beef up some size, because you look in the Western Conference, you have Nikola Jokic, who can fully have his way with the Warriors in a playoff series. I think the Minnesota Timberwolves are another really difficult matchup for the Warriors, should they match up at any point. And even with the Lakers, who at this point you're not building your roster around trying to compete with the Lakers, but in this case they are quite literally going to have to be matching up against the Lakers in a do or die situation, and I just feel like they're going to be able to out-physical them. I like Trace Jackson Davis as a piece for the long term, but he's a little bit more finesse to me. Now, he has shown some big-time flashes on the defensive end, but I don't know if he's ever going to be a true defensive anchor the way that maybe the Warriors fans would like him. I think he's a really nice offensive piece, and that he can fit into the Warriors system in some way, but I also feel like they're going to have to make upgrades, because the reality is, as Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green all get older, they're going to need these other guys to step up more, and they have some nice pieces in this nucleus for them, but I feel like it's difficult to imagine this taking place without some extra help. If Andrew Wiggins is on the trade market, what win and win trade for both teams? I feel like earlier this year, what team was it? I was running some mock drafts, sort of trying to figure out how to make this work, and I believe it was with the Cleveland Cavaliers. I was sort of thinking of an idea where, and this when I was first sort of coming to grips with this, it was before Jonathan Kuminga had really exploded as a talent, and now at this point they probably view him as untouchable. But if it's Wiggins, maybe it's a Moses Moody, who I actually like. I think that the inefficiency is a little frustrating at times, but I do feel like there is real talent there. I liked him going back to college. So if it was maybe Moody, Wiggins, and you probably have to throw in a lot of draft capital, maybe you would have to move on from a Trace Jackson Davis as well, which I know isn't ideal, but if you're going to move off of the Wiggins contract and try and replace that money with better talent, you're going to have to give something up. I would love to see Jarrett Allen on the Warriors. I think Jarrett Allen is one of the most underrated players in the NBA. The defensive presence that he brings, he can be a big-time roller, and he would be a type of big that we haven't seen Curry play with through his career, and I would be really interested to see that. Kirito just mentioned Wiggins and Chris Paul. I could be wrong. I think Chris Paul is on an expiring contract, which would be the issue with that. I can double check right now. Maybe Chris Paul could fit into this if that's the case. Let me do my due diligence here. I'm not sure if it's guaranteed for next season. Wiggins and Chris Paul, as it looks here, if Chris Paul is under contract, it's also very expensive and could make things really difficult for the Cavs. Team option, well, if it's a team option, then it's going to be a decline, which means he's essentially a an expiring contract because nobody's going to pick him up for $30 million is the reality. I feel like Chris Paul it's probably tough to trade him. If he's under contract, maybe they could work out a sign and trade type of situation. I think Wiggins and Moody, you'd package them together. It's probably going to take another piece. I would start at Trayce Jackson-Davis if I'm the Cavaliers, but also if I'm the Cavs, I'd probably be trying to get Brandon Podziemski as well. Again, it's going to cost something to move off of the type of contract that Wiggins is on right now, because there's still a handful of years left on his deal where he has a player option in 2026-27 to fully come off of that. He's going to be making 26 next year, 28 the year after, and up to 30. So it's not necessarily an easy move. Again, I understand there might be some hesitancy. It's fun. I'm sure if you're a Warriors fan too, being able to see the amount of the homegrown talent, I should put it as, coming up, and Podziemski seems like he would be such a great fit for the Warriors. Again, I would sort of hold that off to be the last possible move, but I do think that Jarrett Allen is a really interesting piece if you're the Warriors, where you have all this spacing around him. Maybe it could be difficult with Draymond and Allen together, but Draymond is also shooting. Is he still shooting a career high right now? He's actually been pretty reliable from three, which has been a big-time revelation for this team that I definitely was not expecting coming into this season. Yeah, he's shooting 39% right now on, how many attempts is this? Just over 2, so it's not like he's an elite spacer, but I think that the Cavs need to consider sort of changing things up on their end. I like Jarrett Allen a lot. I like Evan Mobley a lot. They do a lot of the same thing, and I do feel like in this league of spacing, they could probably shuffle their cards a little bit. But for the Warriors here, I feel like there would have to be some sort of balance of either being a Jonathan Kuminga going out or a Brandon Podziemski. You could do maybe Kuminga, Wiggins, and less draft capital, or you could go along the lines of a Moody, Podziemski, and probably Wiggins as well in that, and maybe a little bit more draft capital. But it's a really interesting thought process here. Again, I do think that size is probably the number one thing that they could benefit from. I don't feel like they are miles out of contention. I do think that as long as you have Curry and he's playing the level of basketball that he is, I could see them being in the realm of contention. Brook Lopez is actually a very interesting deal as well. I hadn't thought about that one, but I really like Brook Lopez, and he can shoot, which would be probably a pretty good fit alongside Draymond as well. The Bucks, I mean, it's hard to figure out what you're getting from Wiggins because we've seen him reach the highest of highs from a defensive standpoint going back to 2020-22 in those finals, and really on the season as a whole. He has all the physical tools he needs to be a defender, but it's the consistency with him which is a little bit of a concern. That being said, if the Bucks could unlock that, they need a point of attack defender. So Wiggins could maybe slide into that. Adding Moody and somebody else could be a solid move as well. Doc Rivers hasn't necessarily favored the youth talent on Milwaukee up to this point. Now, AJ Green is actually finding some minutes for him, which is interesting. I really liked Andre Jackson Jr. coming into this draft, and he's sort of found his way out of the rotation there. Same with Marjon Beauchamp as well. But Brook Lopez could definitely be an interesting situation there as well that I had not previously thought of. But the Bucks are probably also going to need to make a move as well. So that seems like a pretty solid move as well in my eyes. But that is all we have time for. Kirito, awesome talking to you, man. This was a really fun activity. But that is all we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. We are every day, Monday through Friday at 2 o'clock. Go enjoy your weekends, and we will see you on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that